All right, everybody. Hope you're having a great start to your week. There was some chaotic news over the weekend, breaking late Friday night, big time trade between the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Karl Anthony Towns is now a New York Knick. Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo heading out to Minnesota. We're going to talk about all the different angles and what this means for the Celtics and how it relates. And then Jayson Tatum, Larry Bird, maybe. We'll see. Little bit of tidbit left over from Media Day we want to get to here. So we'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Green with Envy. Let's lock in. What up, what up, what up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As always, is your boy Will Weir checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today, hopefully he's feeling a little bit better. Had a rough weekend for our guy over here, but hopefully he's doing okay to get through this podcast this morning. It is my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, the one and only Greg Manakis. This a flu game, or we on the upswing now from the flu game?
I don't know if I was feeling worse than Timberwolves fans were probably feeling this weekend, but I was puking all weekend. And if I was a Timberwolves fan, man, I probably would have felt the same way because I don't know what the hell that team is thinking with this trade.
Well, let's get right into it because I'm not gonna lie. This broke Friday night. So Friday night, in one of our group texts, I think it was from our friend Liptak, who's a big time Knicks fan. I was on the couch, had just taken an edible, was just watching a movie, and I got so distracted. I can't remember. There was like a 20-minute session of this movie, Wolves on Apple TV. Solid movie, worth your time. Not
What was the dosage on the edible?
That was 5 milligrams. I mostly just dabble with 5 milligrams. I think it's like the perfect amount to like get like a little high, but I'm in control and I'm not like, I don't like to get super
indica, sativa.
I think this one's a hybrid. So that way it was like, just kind of chilling Friday night. Usually I get like my indicas like, okay, played basketball at like 9 p.m. like a fucking crazy person, and my adrenaline's gonna keep me up. Gotta get something to bring me down. This was kind of like, I'm not going out tonight, but we're just gonna have a nice little night with the wife, and we're gonna watch a movie and eat a little popcorn. So,
quick question: when if for those of you that are watching, Will works for a company called Dutchie that handles like marijuana payments for distributors out there, legal.
Yeah, we're a cannabis technology company. That's the easiest way to put it.
There you go. When are we gonna get sponsored by Dutchie?
That's a good question, man. So I think we got to talk a lot more weed for that to happen. I mean, the Green with Envy title, I think
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, the Green with Envy title works. We'll see. I'm kind of changing positions, like still same department, but I'm gonna get a little bit more FaceTime with some executives. So we'll see. So we'll try to work that into the pitch over the next couple of months, and maybe by the new year, maybe we can get a little Dutchie.
That would be pretty sweet, man. I'm not gonna lie. That'd be pretty sweet.
We'll see if we can work it into the mix. But yeah, so late Friday night, this news breaks, and I have been dying to talk about this with people more than I had. Like I've been on Twitter trying to like just jump into like conversation. And usually I'm not actually, I'll try to get some engagement for our account, but I'm like, no, who wants to talk? Like I want to see what your thoughts are on this, because I think there's so many angles. It's such a fascinating trade. So to lay it out, and it's not even finalized yet. We're recording this Monday morning. Because the new CBA is so complicated, these are both apron teams. They're still trying to make the money work. So this is not even like technically official yet. And we've seen from our own experience with the KP and Brogdon trades can fall apart. This would feel a little rough if this fell apart. That obviously had a deadline with the whole KP Brogdon thing, so that was a part of that. This, they have some time to work it out, and so we'll see how it gets done. But the main crux of the deal: Karl Anthony Towns to the Knicks, Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's the timing of this trade is fascinating. The fact that it's two of the top probably 6 to 8 teams in the league, both of them really coming off their best seasons in 2 decades. Greg, there's so many things I want to talk about, but what jumped out to you, when you first saw this trade, and what do you want to talk about first?
Well, I think, being a Celtics podcast, let's start from the perspective of Celtics fans and what this does for this Knicks team that last year, even before, their success in the playoffs and how Jalen Brunson just went crazy, I was looking at them as the main contender to take the Celtics out in the playoffs. They didn't end up matching up because of all the injuries in New York, and it just didn't happen. And then obviously with Mitchell Robinson's injury and Isaiah Hartenstein going to the Thunder, I wasn't necessarily fearing the Knicks as much as I think Knicks fans were hoping Celtics fans were feeling about that team, because although they got OG Anunoby, who's great and is made in a lab to guard the Jays, and then they go out and get Mikal Bridges. And I think we had a podcast about that trade earlier when that happened, and we were talking about this team, the Knicks, going all in on the vibes, right? They were just betting on Jalen Brunson and his Villanova buddies. And I was actually a little bit worried about that team if Mitchell Robinson was healthy. But Mitchell Robinson, he's basically turning into like an Andrew Bynum, Rob Williams hybrid, where he just can't stay healthy, and he's probably never going to be healthy. Just the way he moves on the court, the way he walks, he just looks like one of those guys.
He's that prisoner of hope player, right? Where you're every season, you're like, hey, if this year this guy stays healthy, we can be this. And you hope really with those guys, like you said, Bynum and Rob are great examples of just get 1 year. And 1 year Rob stays healthy, Celtics go to the finals. And even then he really wasn't fully healthy. Andrew Bynum, same thing with the Lakers. The couple years that he was able to stay healthy, they were in the finals. I mean, they won back-to-back finals with Bynum in their lineup, right? Like
exactly.
Little sliver of hope, and Mitchell Robinson is definitely at least in that category for what he does for the Knicks.
Definitely. So the question I just want to pose to you, and for anybody that's watching on Twitter right now, just let us know. Do you fear this Knicks iteration with Karl-Anthony Towns more or less than you did before the trade?
So I think in the short term, more I think their ceiling is definitely higher with Karl-Anthony Towns. I think there's no question. Like, I don't think the Knicks resoundingly won this trade. Like, I think in the short term, they definitely won it. Like, if you look at the two teams, I think one got worse and one got better. So therefore, at least in the short term, the Knicks win this trade. As if you've listened to this podcast for the last couple of years, Karl-Anthony Towns, neither of us big cat guys in this studio right now, in this recording studio. And, I got to give him some credit though, because I do think last year, a lot of the problems, or some of the problems I have with Cat, and I still have some, like I think he makes mind-numbingly dumb fouls. I think he whines and complains, and like I am really worried about not worried from a Celtics perspective. I think his personality in New York is just a powder keg waiting to happen. So I'm very fascinated to see how that all plays out. But I think last year in Minnesota, one of the reasons why, at least initially, I was not buying into the Wolves is I'm like, Cat's not going to take a backseat to Ant. Cat is, presents himself as the greatest shooting big man in the history of the NBA. He's revolutionized the game. And then, winning the play-in was bigger than anything any other team did. Like crazy shit that this man says that is not going to fly in New York. And so I just couldn't really buy in. But to his credit, I think last year he finally kind of understood, okay, this is Ant's team. I'm the Robin to the Batman. And he did it very gracefully. And I think he actually made it work. And that's why I was a little surprised of this move for Minnesota. But, looking at the Knicks perspective, I 100% get, at least in the short term, because the money is the real kind of question here long term. But short term, you get yourself a stretch five, and you get a guy who, listen, I don't think there's an ocean between Randle and Towns's talent, but there is a gap. Like Towns is more talented than Randle, in my opinion. And it was funny. I was kind of working up a take, Greg, where with Mitchell Robinson being out, that I think this is, if you're a Knicks fan, this is probably, if you can get him back healthy, this might be the best thing for your team long term, is forcing Tibbs to have to play that 5-man out with Randle, Bridges, Anunoby, Hart, or DiVincenzo at the time, and Brunson, and not having the option to say, okay, I tried it 3 games, I don't like it, I need a big out there. Because that was going to be their best lineup, their most talented lineup. But it was kind of a fake true 5-man out, right? Because Randall's like a 33% 3-point shooter. He had 1 year where he was really knocked down. Hart super
very streaky too,
right? You know what I mean? So, but with Cat, I do think Cat gives the Knicks some KP like ability to bring the top off that offense. Like that offense now, I think can pretty closely, in general, this Knicks starting 5 really closely resembles what the Celtics are trying to do. And so I think with actually adding Cat into, like I said, he's called himself the greatest big man shooter of all time. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. Percentage wise, he's in the conversation, and I think he's probably the best big man shooter in the league right now. And so, it is going to make a massive difference. So I think from a Knicks perspective, it definitely in the short term brings them closer to the Celtics. There's still going to be a lot of questions they have to answer. They still have a lot of health concerns with, OG is always hurt. They still are going to need Mitchell Robinson back at some point to give a little bit of depth. Like I think the top end depth though now is pretty close to the Celtics. I mean, I still think they're a worse version overall of what the Celtics are trying to do, but I do think this closed the gap, and I think Karl-Anthony Towns definitely, especially on the offensive end, makes them far more explosive and just in general fits way better than what Randle was going to be.
So I don't even know what the answer to the question is, though. Do you fear them more or less than
More? I mean,
last
it's
year?
more. Yeah, I
More.
mean, I think
Okay.
they're closer to the Celtics. So that was kind of my thing. They're
Okay.
closer to the Celtics, so it's more. And I think there's definitely now when I look at them, because the fit of Towns versus Randle is so much better from size and shooting
Yeah.
perspective, that I think now I think before you could have been like, well, them and Philly pretty close. Like I think it's definitively Knicks, and then Philly would be kind of the hierarchy that I'm looking at.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, the Philly moves this offseason, I think, are pretty interesting, man. Especially if with Philly, right? Maxey needs
Mhm.
to take another leap. He was awesome in
Yeah.
the playoffs last year. Embiid needs to be healthy, of course. And then Paul George, we sleep on Paul George just like we sleep on Cat on this podcast, I think, in general. But he's kind of tailor made to be the third option on a team.
Oh, for sure.
So I think with him in Philly, a guy that can guard the Jays on the wings, I think that he's also kind of tailor made in the lab to guard the Jays. So
Mhm.
although there are some, highlights of Jayson Tatum dropping him on some snatchback crossovers and things
Yeah.
like that, Paul George is a really good defender. And if all he has to worry about is kind of filling in the gaps and just be a better version of Tobias Harris, which he absolutely is, I think they're going to be just
Not even a
fine.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there's a mild of differences. I
yeah,
said there's
speaking
not
about
that much of an ocean.
sleeping on
Right.
guys on this podcast, we do not like Tobias Harris. He's
Yeah,
terrible. What team is he on
for good
now?
reason. He went back to the Pistons.
He went back to the Pistons. Yeah, so
Yeah,
he's in
he
basketball.
got a huge bag. It was like 2 years, 50. They were just trying to fill salary, and
Right,
they're
right,
in
right.
huge rebuild mode.
Yeah, so I guess my answer to my own question, though, I actually would have feared the team before the trade more than this version of the Knicks,
Interesting.
just
Just because
because
of the
the
vibes. Mhm.
continuity and vibes. Although they were bringing in Bridges, the fact that they had the Nova boys together, I was really looking forward to watching that. I thought that was going to be a really interesting subplot just to see
Mhm.
if a team that won together at the college level could continue that, as all those guys have taken another leap
Yeah.
in their
I mean, they
careers.
still have 3 guys, right? I know everyone's like, Nova's dead. It's like, they still have 3 guys that are in their starting
Right.
lineup
Yeah,
that play
yeah,
in the
yeah.
same college team, but
For sure. But I just wanted to see that because DiVincenzo was awesome for the Knicks last year. I think
Big Ragu.
pe people kinda aren't realizing how great he was for them. He was shooting high 40s in the playoffs from 3, and
Mhm.
he had some
He was
big.
their second leading scorer behind Brunson. Like,
Yeah,
Brunson had to do everything, and it was basically if DiVincenzo was coming along or Josh Hart was hot, that was all they really had because Randall was out, Robinson was in and out. Like, it was Brunson, DiVincenzo, or bust. Was kinda what they were working with.
right. So I think Randall and DiVincenzo, although Randall didn't play in the playoffs, there was like this Julius Randle factor that the Celtics always kind of had a hard time figuring out just because he's so strong. There was nobody that could guard him. When we had Grant Williams on him, Grant Williams got cooked. Al Horford couldn't guard him. Jason Tatum was too weak. Jaylen Brown just a little too small. So we couldn't really guard Julius Randle. He was very inefficient, but there were times where it felt like he was a real problem. So when you have Cat on the team, he's just one of those guys that he seems like with Tibbs, he didn't have a great relationship with Tibbs the first time. Apparently, they squashed their beef because Tibbs coached him in Minnesota. For
That's
those
the
who may
other
have
subplot to
forgotten,
this, which I was like, I kind of forgot about for a second that they already have a history. And I was like, wait a minute, that didn't go super well. What the hell's
no,
happening right now?
it went terrible. So I think if Cat has learned to kind of fit in around Anthony Edwards, because when he comes to the Knicks, he's going to have to fit in around everybody else, right? Although
Right.
he's going to be the highest paid person on this roster, I think that for Karl-Anthony Towns to come into New York and being billed as the number one option would have been way too much for his shoulders. He's coming in as the number 2, maybe number 3 guy, depending on how you look at it with the rest of the roster with Bridges and OG. But offensively, he's definitely the number 2 option on that team, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of perfect for him. He showed in Minnesota that he can do that. It's just like all of the Cat big purr energy that he brings to the court. I don't know that that's going to play in New York. And
It
I
feels
don't
like an
know.
awful mix. Like that's
Yeah,
one of the things
I
that
feel like Knicks
immediately
fans
stood
are
out
going to
to me.
hate him.
100%. Like I feel like it's going to be a struggle for them to get excited because when Cat's doing his fake, winning the play-in is the most accomplished thing that anyone's ever done in the NBA, whatever the hell he said. Like, that's not going to play in New York. New York doesn't play that shit. Like, these fans are diehard, and they're relatively smart fans. Like, they're not. I mean, shit. They had a combustive relationship with Julius Randle, who went to 2 All NBAs and 4 All Stars in his time in New York, and was before Brunson got there was the main reason that New York kind of got back on track as far as a basketball organization. And that fell apart because they didn't like his attitude on the court. What the fuck do you think Cat's gonna be like? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and no one I've ever, like, when I watch Karl Anthony Towns, it feels the times that he's tried to put on his big boy, tough guy, leadership type, it, persona, it just feels forced and fake. And it's
Yeah,
gonna
oh,
not
everything he does on the court feels forced and fake. Like
right.
his whole thing is forced and fake. I think the thing with Randall that people didn't like is that he was very standoffish, very aloof, right? So he would always be on the court, kind of a mean mug, but he looked unhappy on the court. I think you're not going to say that about Cat though. He's kind of like goofy and carefree
Mm-hmm.
on the court, and then that's why it feels so forced when he tries to play tough because he's just not. He just seems like kind of like a sweetheart, like a nice guy. And when he's on the court, it hasn't really translated as, the alpha personality that he's trying to put
Mm-hmm.
out there. He's just not like an alpha type guy, but he doesn't have to be in New York. Hopefully he just embraces his goofiness because I think the Knicks fans will at least appreciate him being authentic.
Yeah, but I don't even know what that looks like from Carly Towns, if I'm being honest. So that would be a whole new 9 years into his career. That would be something new. Not that it can't happen. But yeah, I think that's where, like I said, I think the ceiling for the Knicks is now higher with this trade.
Yeah,
But I also think
definitely.
there's a lot more variability to their season. Whereas, if they'd kept it the way it was with Randall and DiVincenzo, I was like, the worst case scenario you guys have, other than, obviously injuries are always kind of looming over any type of worst case scenario, but was like, all right, you guys are going to probably win somewhere around 52 to 55 games, be a 2 or 3 seed at worst, and you guys are going to make some noise in the playoffs. Now it's like I do think you guys have we'll see what happens with Celtics health wise and KP and all that stuff. And like I think there's an outside chance that they could be the 1 seed, but also if this goes really wrong, I think there's a chance it could be the 4 or 5 seed because I think it's just that much more variability that just got thrown into this mix. And we got to see obviously how it plays out. But I'm just, as guys who are very skeptical of Cat, him in New York has just never felt like a good fit. And now if you're this Knicks team, I mean, you're out of all picks. You had like that 1 pick left basically.
Right.
You're pot committed for the next 3 or 4 years with Cat. You just signed Brunson to the extension. Bridges has one coming. You just signed Anunoby. Hart has a few more years left at about 18 million. Like this 5, the Brunson, Hart, Anunoby, Bridges, and Cat, that 5 is your 5 for the next
Right.
3 years or so.
Mhm.
And I mean, we'll see, because even with that, just like the Celtics are going to have a tax bill, Colin, the Knicks are going to have one too. Maybe they'll have to make some moves. But I mean, let's just, before we go to the Minnesota angle, how do you view that 5? Because that's going to be their main 5. Like, they definitely lost some depth. They still have Deuce McBride. We'll see if Mitchell Robinson comes back, and that really kind of is their 7. And they'll try to, like, maybe find an 8th, 9th guy. But when you look at that starting 5, how do you view that in comparison to the Celtics starting 5?
I think it's pretty tailor-made to match up with the Celtics, honestly,
Yeah.
because I think Hart, Anunoby, and Bridges can switch pretty much everything, right? Brunson's a weak link to some degree. I think
Mm-hmm.
Cat, when you just look at his ability to get out to the perimeter and guard Porzingis, I think he'll do a pretty good job. He's mobile enough where he could hang with Porzingis. Porzingis isn't gonna like shot fake and blow by Cat. That's not
Right.
gonna happen. But he could do that to Mitchell Robinson every day of the week. Like Mitchell Robinson cannot guard Porzingis for the life of him. That's why
Yeah.
Hartenstein was so important to the Knicks last year because he was just such a better matchup. And we called that from the very first game last year, right? We were just like Mitchell Robinson can't play against Celtics. So I think with Cat on the court, although he's gotten cooked by Tatum like plenty of times, there's like a whole like 3-minute highlight reel of Tatum just cooking Cat. I do think that he showed a little bit more willingness to buy into a system last year with the T-Wolves. 2 years ago before the Gobert trade, when Cat was the 5, he did not look good, right? They really struggled with Cat at the 5. That's why they went out and got Gobert. But that team also didn't have the level of defenders that this iteration of the Knicks is going to have with
Mhm.
Bridges, Anunoby, and Hart. All three of
And
those
especially
guys.
Anunoby, because Anunoby
Oh
can
yeah,
guard some of those centers that maybe
and
Cat can
Hart
struggle.
can
That's kind of
too.
it's the yeah, and it's the Drew Holiday where we send Holiday
Mhm.
out to guard, Embiid or Giannis or whatever. Like they can do that with Anunoby and Hart and guys like that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to just to see like how they would actually start their matchups on the Celtics. I would imagine it would be OG on Tatum. If you think
Mhm.
about Tatum, I don't have his numbers pulled up against the Raptors, but there was always like for all the time that OG was on the Raptors, Tatum didn't really score the ball. He
Yeah.
he
I know
really
exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of games I can remember in Toronto where there was that what was the old stat line that Tatum used to just somehow ended up there all the time where he was in his bad games, he was like 3 of 14 or something. There was like a certain field goal
I think it was three
like
for
percentage.
17.
It was 3 for 17. That's what it was. It was 3 for
Yeah.
17. And I feel like there were several of those against the Raptors. And yeah, I mean, like you said, like this team is kind of built in a laboratory, but very, very clearly just looking at the Celtics, like how do we compete? How do we match up? This team feels 100% designed to attempt to try to do just that.
Yeah, so looking at Tatum versus the Raptors, like there were definitely some games that he went off. Like in 2022, he had 31 points. In 2023, he had 27 points. But for the most part, it's 19, 17, 27, 21, 31, 8, 22,
Mhm.
18, 27, 17, 40. So, I mean, that is kind of the Tatum experience, right? Where he can get hot and other games
Yeah,
he
and
kind of
like
just
you said,
floats.
OG's also hurt a lot, so it depends who was playing in some of
That's
those
true.
games as well too. And I think at times they might have tried Siakam, and that didn't really work out well. So it was, because OG was still younger at the time and was gaining
Yeah.
responsibility,
But
but
the the
there
main
definitely
point
was
being that
examples of it.
yeah, OG, I think OG would probably start on Tatum. Although
Mhm,
Jalen being the bully ball guy that he is, I think OG might be a better matchup for him than Bridges. I think Bridges is a good defender. I just don't think that he can guard the Jays, man. He's just like a little slight of frame, and I think both Tatum and Brown can take him into deeper waters and just kind of just show
mhm.
him he's not, he can't swim with them there. So I like Bridges on that team. I just don't think he's the Jays stopper that people kind of made him out to be. I think OG
Mhm.
is definitely more of that guy. I think Hart is more of that guy, honestly, than Bridges is. I
Yeah,
think
that's what I was
Bridges would
gonna I
be an
was I was trying
interesting
to think.
matchup. I think he'd be an interesting
Maybe
matchup on Drew or D White.
right, that's kinda what I was saying is I wonder if Bridges goes to D Watt. I feel like Brunson would probably default to Holiday if they just think Holiday's gonna be the corner three-point shooter again. That's at least the best option as far as quote unquote "hiding" Brunson would be on Holiday, and so maybe it's Bridges on White, Hard on JB, OG on Tatum, and then Towns on either Horford or Porzingis, depending on. I think that'd be matter, but I mean, those are fascinating matchups, right? Because I do think when you even just look at it from kind of like a guard perspective. So let's say you have Brunson and Hart against White and Holiday. Brunson's the best offensive player in that grouping. Celtics have the edge defensively, but Hart is a very versatile defender that can go up and down the spectrum, and he's also maybe the best rebounding guard in the entire league, right?
Mhm.
And just has a nose for the ball and is going to constantly be causing havoc and can play 48 minutes seemingly, at a moment's notice. And then when you look at the front court, it's basically the Jays, discount Jays, meaning Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby. And then
Mhm.
you have Cat and, I'd say Cat and Porzingis when both healthy, pretty close to a wash. I think maybe Cat maybe
Porzingis much
slightly
better
more
defender
talented,
player.
but yeah, exactly. I think you can start nitpicking and figure out, okay, maybe it's slightly one way or another, but close to a wash. Leave it at that. Like this is going to be a fascinating matchup to see what this looks like. And we're gonna have to wait a little bit, obviously, until we get KP back to see what this officially looks like. I think they're gonna make the trade official. But let's go to the Wolves angle here for
Okay.
just a few minutes before we go to the Jayson Tatum segment that we want to get to, because when we were looking at how the playoffs were breaking down last year, and it was like, okay, well, the Wolves and the Nuggets are playing each other. The Nuggets are without a doubt the number one team that we felt like we might have a Nuggets problem. The number two team was probably the Wolves because of
Yeah.
their size and their versatility. And then you add Ant on the wing. And especially, once they had Mike Conley back, they had an adult to kind of set everything up and run things properly. Like that was the team that was like, that team can absolutely, if not beat the Celtics, give them a lot of trouble. Like that's not an easy matchup. And then they happened to run to the Mavericks where they had a Luka problem. They couldn't guard Luka. And I was like, man, the Mavericks seemed like a great matchup for the Celtics. And so it really became, styles make fights like we've talked about. And so for the Wolves to make this moves, it feels like it's just a money dump. And because I think it's hard to say that I don't think anyone's really making the case that they got better. I think some people think that the financial relief is worth it for this move. But if I'm a Wolves fan, I gotta feel like, man, we couldn't have tried this for one more year, especially like after we just invested all of this capital into Rudy Gobert. Now you're pairing it with Randle. Like, talk about an awkward fit. Randle and Gobert, and even Randle and Ant is a weird fit because Cat, at least they made sense with the spacing that you can get between the two of
Right.
them. I mean, I think for the Wolves, I looked at them as like in the West, I think everyone's making it like a big four where it's the Mavs, Wolves, Thunder, and Nuggets. I don't really fully believe in the Mavs being in that. I think the Mavs are closer to that group of like 5 to 11, where who knows what could happen. I think the Mavs are closer to that. But the Wolves, I was like, they're right there with those other three teams. And I might even put them ahead of the Nuggets with what the Nuggets lost and the continuity, which I think is an underrated piece of all this that the Celtics are going to have, that a lot of teams other than really OKC are going to be struggling to kind of figure out, that they could absolutely take another leap. And now I'm putting the Wolves kind of, at least from a championship perspective, like they're going to win some games. But from a championship perspective, I kind of out of sight, out of mind with this move. Like I really, really don't like it from an on-court perspective.
Well, yeah, I think if you're just plugging Randle into Cat's position, I would say yes. But you have to think about how they might evolve based off of this new iteration of the team, with DiVincenzo and Ant probably being the closing backcourt. You could go Jaden McDaniels, Randle, and Naz Reid with Gobert on the bench. Think about Gobert in the Olympics. He got benched in favor of Lasor and Yabusele.
That's
You know
true.
what I mean? So maybe Rudy Gobert isn't even on the court when it matters for this team, which brings you to the question of like, why trade Cat then? Why not just explore options to trade Rudy Gobert? I understand you gave up a lot for Gobert, but like you didn't get a
But if he's
lot
just gonna
back
sit on
for
the bench,
Cat.
but if your answer is he's gonna sit on the bench and not play, then you know what I mean. Like it's
Right.
it's
I
just a
don't
weird
think
scenario.
I'm not saying that Rudy Gobert is going to be on the bench. I think that they're still invested in him. Their numbers are great with Rudy Gobert on the court defensively. His on-off numbers are always fantastic. But I do think if they're going to match up now with the Thunder, right? Say it's them against the Thunder in the Western Conference Finals, or them against the Mavericks. Let's start with the Thunder. The Thunder are going to go with their lineup of Chet. They'll probably have Hartenstein, J-Dub, Caruso, and SGA. Lou Dort maybe is in there instead of Hartenstein, depending on the
I think it just
matchups.
depends on matchup wise, but yeah, something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that's actually, if you're going small ball against that team, right, with the DiVincenzo, Edwards, McDaniels, Randle, and Naz Reid, I think that lineup actually matches up pretty well with the Thunder. Naz Reid is a heck of a defender. He can guard out in the
Oh, I love
perimeter.
Naz Reid.
Yeah. And then
I mean, this trade is also a big gamble, not necessarily a big gamble, but a gamble on Naz Reid as well. Just that, like, hey,
oh yeah,
we've got Naz and we believe in Naz, which I think they should. But it's definitely putting more of an emphasis on his role with this team.
dude, there were many games in the playoffs last year where Cat was on the bench and Naz Reid was in the game.
That's a fair point.
So I think let's get back to the matchups though, right? With OKC against the Wolves, I think Randle is actually a pretty interesting matchup against that team, because Lou Dort is probably the best matchup to guard him, right? Chet's probably too small to guard Randle. Hartenstein out there. I guess he could match up with him, but then he can be exploited a little bit on the other end.
Who do you think's guarding Ant from the Thunder? Would that be Caruso, or would that I was
I'd probably
thinking
put
that might be.
Caruso's now their best perimeter defender, right? So
Mhm.
I'd probably put him on Ant. But him and Lou Dort can kind of they can kind of like switch spots there.
Right.
But I would imagine Lou Dort's on the bench and Hartenstein's in the game. That's just kind of how I feel, especially when they invested that much into Hartenstein. But then Hartenstein can't shoot threes. Lou Dort's pretty decently reliable from three.
Yeah.
He doesn't look good, but he shoots it and it goes in sometimes, kind of like Marcus
Yeah.
Smart.
I think
for
he's in, like,
Celtics
the high
fans.
30s, you know what I mean? Like, mid to high
Yeah.
30s, like, reliable enough to give you actual spacing, whereas Hartenstein's gonna have to be the role guy with a 4-out system.
Right. And then McDaniels on SGA on the other end. I think that's a pretty good matchup there.
Mhm.
I think Ant locking down J-Dub. I think Ant would take that. Ant also could lock down SGA if he really wanted
Mhm.
to. I think that's one of the things about the playoffs last year is that we didn't get to see the Wolves against the Thunder. That's something that I wanted to see,
Yeah.
but then the Mavs ended up taking out the Thunder, and then the
Took
Mavs
out both of them, yeah.
take out the Wolves, right? I mean, that was just a Luka problem for everybody. So with the matchup for the Wolves against the Thunder, I actually think this puts them in maybe a slightly better position to match up against the Thunder, but the same argument you could have made about Randle taking advantage of them. I think you could have made the same argument about Towns taking advantage of them just with the size. So long-winded way of saying
So do you think
I
the
don't
Wolves
know if
are
this worked.
okay? That's gonna be my question: is do you think the Wolves are better after this trade? And I think your answer is I don't know, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, because I mean, Towns is such an enigma, man. Like there were times where he that's the same thing with the Knicks,
One of
right?
the hardest guys to figure out.
He has so many moments where you see it. I mean, last year was the first time in the playoffs that I was watching Towns, and I was like, "Oh, I get it. I get what they're
Mhm.
trying to do with Karl Anthony Towns." Like
He
there are
was
moments
awesome in
where
the
he
Nuggets
looks
series
really
and
effective.
The Suns and Nuggets series. He was huge in those series, and he was awesome. It
He
fell
guarded
apart
Jokic
in the
really well.
conference finals, but yeah, exactly. And that's the other part of this for the Wolves as well. And I guess you can use Randall as well as part of that 3-man rotation to try to stifle Jokic. But after Cat did the bulk of the work against Jokic in that series, Jokic is still the best player in the world. It feels weird to trade the guy that you leaned on the most and for the first time felt like stepped up to what you've always wanted, and then you trade that piece. And I don't know. It's just, and you mentioned it earlier, the continuity pieces, and applies to the Knicks as well. It's it's always tough to look at teams, and I know there's financial stuff that goes into it, but when they give up on that continuity, and I even think back to the Celtics in the day when we made the Kendrick Perkins and Jeff Green swap, like Jeff Green, especially because he was like year 4, year 5, is young Jeff Green, clearly, clearly more talented than Kendrick Perkins, but continuity at that time for an aging Celtics team was part of their advantage. And, obviously Jeff Green had some heart stuff and it just didn't work out. And Shaq got hurt and all this other stuff. But it was at the time, that was the conflicting part of it was like, yeah, we got the better talent, but continuity over all these other teams that were figuring out. That was around the time of the Heatles and everything else. Like teams are still figuring it out. We know who we are. We know exactly where we need to be, what we need to do, what spots, who can guard what, when we need to adjust. And now we've got this new factor in. And I really think that was part of, and maybe that season always gets derailed, but it's the one time in my life I'll probably say I would have taken Kendrick Perkins over Jeff Green in that scenario. And I think the Celtics would have had a better chance. And so, breaking up the continuity for both the Knicks and the Wolves, I think that's a huge under discussed risk for both of these teams right now.
Yeah, that's why if I was a Wolves fan, I started this by being like, I would be puking if I was a Wolves fan because we just went to the first Western Conference Finals since KG, right?
Yeah, I
They
mean that's
made
the
it.
only time they've ever
Yeah.
literally the Wolves have maybe the craziest history. I think the only time they've ever won a playoff series was that one year where KG took them to the conference finals
That was
with
his MVP
Sprewell
year.
and Sam Cassell. Yeah. And so that's the only time they've ever
That was
won
a
a
fun
playoff
team.
series until last year. That was
Yeah.
those are the 2 seasons that in the Wolves history that they've ever won a playoff series
Right.
were those 2 years.
So
And
how do you give up on that team this offseason? You at least bring it
right.
back just to see if you have lightning in a bottle with that team. You know what I mean? Like the continuity piece, I would have just ran it back one more year. You didn't have to make the move this year. I forget which podcast I heard it on. Maybe it was Howard Beck and Michael Pina, where they were talking about
Mhm.
it. It was very similar to the OKC trading James Harden a year before they
Okay.
probably had to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I like that perspective on it, because it feels like they just gave up on this team 1 year too early just for future financial tax relief. And if I was a Wolves fan, I would have liked to have seen it one more year. It's not like
One more
they
time. Yeah.
failed. They exceeded expectations, if anything, last year, making it to the Western Conference Finals, and just ran into a horrible matchup against Luka. And it's not like Towns was the problem guarding Luka, right?
Right.
Like your
And that's
wing.
the other thing. They didn't solve that at all. They made their defense against Jokic a little bit worse, and they still haven't solved the Luka problem. So, like, yeah, like you said with the Thunder, I think they can make a reasonable case that they have more options there. But I think versus at least two of the other teams that are going to be likely in the running, you haven't solved one problem, and you've made your answer to another problem a little bit worse.
Yeah, and like just thinking about DiVincenzo, because we haven't talked about him
Yeah,
enough on this. Like, he's a really good 3-point shooter, catch and shoot 3-point
he will
shooter,
help them.
movement
That
3-point
makes sense
shooter.
that he was a sticking point in this deal. That makes sense.
Yeah, scrappy player as well. Really, really solid defender. I think with him, he's gonna be the only movement shooter really in that rotation. And Cat, for as good of a 3-point shooter as he is not a movement shooter, right? They would send him
Mhm.
off pin downs occasionally, but he was mostly a floor spacer and pick and
Yeah.
pop big. Right. He didn't do much rolling. It was a lot of like, they maybe ran some Spain actions to get him a pop three or anything like that. They ran him off some flare screens. But for the most part, he wasn't really a movement shooter, where Dante can really move without the ball and he can spot up. So I think that wrinkle in their offense might actually, some second side decoy actions that they could run with him, double wide pin downs that they could do for him just to clear out one side while Ant is doing work on the other side with an empty side pick and roll, things like that. I would like to see this Wolves offense with Dante, McDaniels, Reed, and Randle before I like really make any calls on it.
Yeah.
But such a big part of their offense is the Gobert screen and roll and just diving into the basket. We've kind of pushed Conley to the side here because I don't think Conley will be on the court when it matters for that team now that they got Dante. They'll be too small if they want to go with a Conley and Dante backcourt, right? That's just
Yeah,
too small to hang
that's not
out
gonna
with.
play late in the game. Yeah,
Right. So
that's gonna be tough.
maybe that's also a little bit of it, is that they were looking at their roster and they're saying, when it matters, Conley can't really be on the court. Ant's not a good enough playmaker and decision maker. We saw last year when he got double teamed, he kind of shit the bed.
Mhm.
If he wasn't on fire, he wasn't able to manipulate the defense. So Cat wasn't really that guy. He bailed them out with some 3-pointers here and there, but you can't really throw the ball to Cat and have him make plays. So with Dante, you have a guy that isn't necessarily a like alpha decision maker on the court, but he's definitely someone that can run a little bit more of your offense and gives you another wrinkle that is a little bit less predictable than what Cat was for that team.
Yeah. Massive shakeup. Two top teams that the Celtics are going to be looking at all season long. Knicks, obviously, in the Eastern Conference. Minnesota keeping an eye out towards potentially any finals matchup. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that all shakes out. We'll get a look at the Knicks coming up on opening night, and hopefully we'll get one of our Knicks friends out there in the Twitterverse to come in and join us and kind of break that all down leading up to that opening night. But last thing we want to touch on here before we get out of here, there was one nugget that I found a little bit after the media day. Jayson Tatum, who was kind of making the rounds, sat down with Jared Greenberg from NBA TV and had this comment. Don't have the full clip for you. I'm just going to read the comment that jumped out to me here, where he was kind of talking about his motivation coming into the season. We've all talked about the chip on his shoulder, Jaylen Brown, and so on and so forth. And so the quote was, "I didn't need any extra motivation coming into the season. The motivation came from not being satisfied. Larry Bird is the best Celtic to ever wear this uniform, and that's the guy I'm chasing." And that was a really interesting comment from Jason Tatum. Number one, we can debate if Larry Bird is the greatest Celtic. I'd probably say it's Bill Russell, but that's not really the point of what we're getting to here. But I think it's interesting. Number one, just we've talked before, JT being a very very savvy, very seasoned media professional, right? Like he's been trained for this his whole life. And so him talking about chasing Larry Bird, like he knows what that name, Larry Bird, Boston Celtics, what that means to the fan base. And so, started thinking, I wonder, is there a chance that Jayson Tatum could ever actually catch Larry Bird in Celtics lore. And so let me set this up for you here, Greg, and I'll let you
I'll
dive
let
in
you cook
because
on it.
well, we got 7 seasons of evidence from Jayson Tatum, and so I wanted to kind of compare where they're at right now. And we know how Larry's story plays out. He ends up playing only 13 total seasons, but 7 seasons into the league. Let's take a look at the tail of the tape, right? So Jayson Tatum, 7 seasons in. I think the age is important for this as well. So this is his age 19 through 25 season. Tatum's got 1 ring, 4 All NBAs, 3 first team All NBAs, and 5 All Stars. He's 23 points a game, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists for his career. And just right now, he's 13th all time in Celtics points, on pace to certainly be in that top 3 if you were to just kind of double his career towards the 14-year mark. He's on pace, and that's kind of where his contract lines up to that 13th season. Now, let's take a look at Larry Bird 7 years into his career. These are ages 23 to 29 for Larry Bird. At this time, he's got 3 rings, 3 MVPs, 7 All NBAs, all first teams, 7-time All-Star, obviously, 3-time All Defense, 24 points, 10.5 rebounds, 6 assists. So Jayson Tatum even mentioned this when you listen to the full quote where he says, it's pretty lofty expectations that I have for myself. And I know even if I fall short, it will be a hell of a career. Greg, is there a world in which JT comes anywhere close to what Larry put up? Because, man, I know that we started being Celtics fans just past the end of Larry Bird. And so while I appreciate Larry Bird, when I go back and really look at some of the Larry Bird numbers and you combine that with the tape that we've seen over the years, I think every kid our age read Drive going up the Larry Bird book. Like, Larry Bird is fucking astonishing when you really, really break down his numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, can Tatum ever be unquestionably the best player in the world? Because that's what Larry Bird was
Right.
for multiple years, right? And I don't think Tatum can ever really get to that point, especially with how much talent there is in the league right now. Like, there's so much freaking talent in the league right now. So you're really talking about like the overall feeling about Jayson Tatum in Celtics culture. Like, is he ever going to reach that level? I think statistically, he's not going to catch Bird in terms of all the accolades that you just lined up, right? He's probably not going to have 3 rings. He might get there with those 3 rings. He might get there with 3 MVPs.
Yeah,
Doubt it.
that's a tough one.
Highly doubt it. If he gets
Yeah.
1,
If he gets
I'd be
1,
happy.
I think the line for Tatum's got to be 0.5 as far as an MVP
He's
goes,
still
right? Like,
26 though. He's still
that's fair.
26.
That's fair.
Right. So that's the hope for Tatum, is that these next 3 years he just figures it out. Like, whatever it is that he needs to do to figure out how to be the best version of himself. Because coming into his career, you would never have compared Jayson Tatum's game to Larry Bird's game, right? They were not similar at all.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Bird is a rookie, Jayson Tatum as a rookie. But I think Tatum's game has become so well-rounded that he's made himself more and more like Larry Bird, but I'm not even comparing their games at all. But
Right.
like he's
The well-roundedness of it.
well-rounded aspects of his games. He's rebounding. He's a better defender than Bird is. Like, Bird was a heady defender, had made a lot of like nice steals and things like that, was one of the smartest guys in the court, but could never lock down, SGA in crunch time or John Morant in crunch time. They weren't putting Larry Bird on somebody like that. So I think that's where Tatum, he's starting to develop these other parts of his game. He's becoming a much better playmaker. He's never going to have to be fair to Tatum, that one pass to Horford, the behind the back blind pass
Yeah.
to the
I
three.
think that might have been my favorite play of the entire playoffs. I
It
love
was
that play.
amazing, right? So like, there are these moments out of Tatum where you're like, oh damn, like Tatum's got a little bit more playmaking than I really thought he might ever have. And those are the things that are going to get Tatum like to the Larry Bird status. He has to have more moments that are like iconic, that live forever in Celtics lore. That's the word that you have there at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So I think for Tatum, it's really about finding more moments, because he's going to continue to put up statistics. Like, raw statistics are going to be right there with Bird. I don't know that he's going to necessarily have all the accolades that Bird had, but if he develops more of those moments in his resume, then you could start saying, Jaylen Brown probably would have answered the best Celtics player ever is Bill Russell. I think it's so funny, like comparing. I'm not even gonna compare Tatum and Brown right now, but I do think that with Tatum, like if he gets more of those moments, then you can start making the comparisons between who's the first, second, third best player of all time for the Celtics. Is Tatum going to be in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to chase down whether you have it Bill Russell or Larry Bird, as the top Celtics, those are the top two. Like it's very clear cut. I think for third, a lot of people might have Paul Pierce, and I think there's some arguments there with Havlicek and other guys.
I would say probably Havlicek.
Yeah, and so that's the area where I think Tatum is on track to be, is just behind Russell and Bird, and Jalen's not too far behind, right? Finals MVP Jaylen Brown not too far behind. Like they're on track, and Tatum's definitely kind of in pole position. I think to end up in that Havlicek Pierce category is kind of where he's heading to. But championships talk. Paul's got one championship, two finals. Tatum's already got two finals and one championship. And like you said, he's in his age 26 season. So there's a lot of ways for this to go. And I think even now, like as Jayson Tatum sits 13th all time in Celtics points 7 years into his career, I think there's already an argument to be made that Jayson Tatum is the best scorer of all time in Celtics history. And, he averaged 26 last year, averaged 30 the year before. And we said this all year long. People are like, well, Shea's averaging 30 and every night, and Luka's getting 30. It's like Tatum could get 30 every night, but doesn't need to get 30 every night. Tatum's adjusted his game to the team that he has to make everybody better, speaking to kind of your well-rounded aspect of what Tatum's done. And so Tatum can absolutely be a 30-point per game now. So we know about the shot. We'll get to that when we get to it. But, as long as that stays afloat, like Tatum, I think, is going to go down as the best individual scorer all time in Celtics history. It's going to be really tough to ever be the best player all time in Celtics history, because when you look at the entirety of the NBA and you start talking about, oh yeah, who's your top 10? Larry Bird and Bill Russell are almost 100% in everybody's top 10 players of all time, not just Celtics franchise. And that's a level. I'm going to make a pretty bold prediction here, Greg. Jayson Tatum's never going to get to that level. And so, that in alone within itself is going to prevent from getting there. But I do think within Celtics lore, like JT, it's really impressive what he's done up to age 25, and he's signed through his year 13 right now. Would be kind of the last year of where his contract takes him to. It's going to be fascinating to see where it all plays out, and this team is set up for him to have team and individual success for the next several years until we run into all these contract issues, and we'll see what happens. But like you said, accolades, he's probably not going to get there, but the moments and the feelings that Jayson Tatum produces, that's going to be where he can close the gap, and I think be at least on the heels of that Russell Bird category, and maybe separate himself from Havlicek.
Tatum needs to have one season like Isaiah Thomas had for the Celtics.
Honestly, when I said he's the best scorer of all time in Celtics history, I did think about Isaiah Thomas in my head as I was talking.
That one season, I've never seen anybody score the ball like Isaiah Thomas scored the ball that season.
It was remarkable. Man. It's so crazy. What was it? Was Isaiah Thomas's entire length of his Celtics career? I think it was 2.5 seasons. Yeah, right. I think that still blows my mind for just how amazing that time frame was, and especially that last year, right? Like that was each day that the Celtics had, a game. I was constantly just at work, just giddy about the king in the fourth, just waiting to go home and see how this man who's my height basically is going to go ahead and find a way to score 35 points tonight, because he did it every single night. It was incredible. And you're right. Like Jayson hasn't even quite had those moments, despite being, a all 3-time first team All NBA, winning a championship, all the other accolades. Like there needs to be more of those moments. And I think that's what's going to put him higher in Celtics lore, as well as obviously just continuing to score the basketball the way he does.
Yeah. That's all I got for you on this one.
Yeah. So, I think with that, Greg, let's wrap this up here. That's going to do it for this episode here of Green with Envy. We'll have more for you guys later in the week. The Celtics are heading to Abu Dhabi. We're going to have a preview of Celtics Nuggets. We're going to have a special guest on for that later in the week. So tune into that. Celtics will tip off on the 4th and 6th in Abu Dhabi against the Nuggets. Greg, any final thoughts here before we send this out?
Shout to the Celtics media team for posting more, like post all of the JB versus JT content in the preseason. Like, I want to see all of that. I want to see the one-on-ones. I want to see the shooting contest. I want to see them working out together. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Give me all of that content, Celtics media team. Keep it up.
All right. That's going to do it here. And we'll see you guys later.
His free throw, 4 for the rebound. Here's Pritchard. He loves these. Puts it up half court of the buzzer.
Every time I get this high, I lose my mind. It don't take much no more until I hit the floor. Every time I get this high, it's you I find. It don't take much no more until I'm at your door.
You coming to my core, baby. What can I say? You got me on the floor, you know I came to play. I know I shouldn't, but you seem to take my pain away. And every time I score, Jayson Tatum fade away. I close my eyes and I'm floating the river. I call to see if you open, you know I hope you deliver. Every time you're getting close, I still be sick with the shivers. But there's nothing like that first time. I still remember the first time I saw you. You were looking so fine, chill like lo-fi, watch you go by. It was all I could do to say hi. I still remember the first time I saw you. You were looking so fine, chill like lo-fi.